A scrap dealer buys a railroad, the engines start to cry, and he makes them a promise he keeps for the rest of his life. That is just one of the amazing stories waiting for you in today's episode. Welcome to Pop Culture Passport, your ultimate guide to quirky and cool destinations across the US. I'm your host, Beth Scalacci, aka the Roman Yeti, here to help you dive into the world of theme parks, uncover film and TV locations, and explore quirky museums, roadside attractions, and legendary venues that capture the heart and soul of this unique country. So grab your pop culture passport and let's discover destinations that resonate with your interest, not just with what's trending on social media. Are you ready? Let's roam! Welcome back. My dad has had a model train layout in the basement for, well, as long as I can remember. And when I was little, he built a small N gauge train just for me to run when I was down there with him. So when I got a chance to talk about real trains, the kind that breathe fire and shake the ground, yeah, I got a little nostalgic and I jumped at the occasion. Today, we're talking about one of the most extraordinary railroads in America, not because it's the biggest or the fastest, but because it's the most intact. It's a narrow gauge railroad in the mountains of south central Pennsylvania that closed in 1956, was saved by a scrap dealer who made a promise to a steam engine, reopened for 51 summers, closed again, and then came back from the dead for the second time in 2020. This place is so amazing that the Smithsonian Institution calls it an incomparable national treasure. Nowhere else in America does a site like this exist. So, my guest is Andrew Greene. He is the director of sales for East Broad Top Railroad. And he's also a qualified brakeman. And in his free time, he is the founder of what the Washington Post called the premier American ragtime ensemble in the country. Because when you love something, you commit, and you are going to love Andrew Greene. Guys, as I mentioned in my intro, I'm really excited for this conversation. Um, we are speaking with Andrew Greene, and I just want to, again, I mentioned it in the intro, but he is the director of sales at East Broad Top. But don't let that title fool you. He is also qualified to be a brakeman, and he is a founder of a ragtime ensemble. So we're going to get the full scoop on you, Andrew. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I have to ask, director of sales and brakeman. What exactly is a brakeman for
So a brakeman is a role on the train. It's usually the easiest way to describe it is the conductor's assistant. So the brakeman is usually responsible for assisting people getting on and off the train, helping to get it coupled up to the engine in the morning, doing all of the safety checks, and just making sure that whatever we're doing on the train is safe. For our guests, our visitors, back during the freight days, of course, that would be making sure is all your freight cars, together to roll down the line. So it's something that when you work for a heritage railroad, you have to wear many different hats. So depending on the day, I might be the guy setting up a group of visitors coming from Cleveland, Ohio, to come ride the train. The next day, I might be on the train working it to make sure everything goes down the track as it should. The next day, I might be cleaning bathrooms. It just depends on what the call for the day is. But you learn to love it, and it keeps everything a little bit interesting because no day is the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the fun parts is every day's a little different for sure. Um, why I okay, I'll give you a little backstory. I grew up with a father who still builds them, a model train enthusiast. So I feel like people pick either dinosaurs or trains when they're growing up as like their thing. I was a model train kid. Um, so anytime I see these big trains in action, I get very nostalgic. But what do you think makes trains one of those things that's probably more nostalgic than most other modes of transportation?
I think it really boils down to the fact that they're alive. People can stand next to a dinosaur in a museum. They'll see the skeleton and say, wow, that thing was massive. But you don't really quite get the scope unless you have something that is, breathing next to you. And with a steam locomotive or even a diesel, is it alive in the sense of you and I? Absolutely not. But when you're standing next to it, you can feel the heat radiating from the firebox, and you can hear the different mechanical processes, the air compressor chuffing away, building up your air pressure. You have the steam, the smoke, the sight, the sounds, the smells. There's something about it that people just immediately relate to. I always tell people it's like the closest thing we have to having a dragon in real life, something that's breathing fire and something that is so alive.
That's
But you
so
got to think
true.
about this. It's how Americans transported themselves around for over the last 200 years or so. Originally, that would have been with the old steam locomotives as you headed west, and those families and their parents, and then obviously their children, their descendants grew up with train travel. Now we don't do that as much, but there's sort of that longing, that feeling of this is how grandma and grandpa got around. They went from town to town. And certainly you have films like Polar Express, you have any number of children's books about steam trains and railroads in general that just make it such a passion and something that's so unique that no other form of transportation really has. So when people see the steam locomotive, it brings back those cozy memories. Maybe it's just watching Polar Express in front of the TV with your kids. Maybe it's remembering your grandparents or their great grandparents and hearing the stories of how they went to visit grandpa up in Philly and they took the Pennsylvania Railroad up to there. There's just something about it that you can't really describe, but it becomes so memorable and so nostalgic.
Yeah. I think that's so key. And I love the description of like it's the closest thing we have to dragons because it's true. They're big and they're loud and they fire and I love that. Um, is there, given the nostalgia, is there a place or is something that happens at East Broad Top that people sort of like almost become emotional or you see sort of that kid in them come out?
Yes, there's two places specifically that happens. It's whenever people step on property first, and here's the steam engine either idling in the yard waiting to move, or it's sitting at the platform ready to go. When people are walking up from the parking lot, you can often see them kind of stop and they look and they just get this big old smile on their faces. And the kids get super excited and they start pointing their finger saying, "Daddy, look, look," or the grandparents who just give that kind of like look at each other and they're very emotional. They say, "Oh man, this brings back memories." Especially here, this railroad has been a part of this community for over 150 years.
Wow.
So we have a lot of families and descendants of not only the people who lived in the town, the people who used to work for the railroad, the people who remember, hey, as a kindergartner, my field trip that year was taking a train ride to the Grove and having a picnic. And so it brings back a lot of memories for people. The others, of course, are historic Beltran Machine Shop Complex. It's we'll talk about it later, but it's a place the Smithsonian Institution describes as an incomparable national treasure. And when people walk inside the machine shop and they look up and they see all the original belts that are still hanging there, ready to go on the machines, and they see all of the original machinery, jaws drop and it gets very quiet for a moment or two as people take it all in. And people definitely become emotional. They've never seen anything quite like it. And it's something that we're very honored to keep alive. It's something that we want to make accessible for people to come and experience because you're not going to see anything like this anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's uh, from everything you guys have told me about it, it it does seem super emotional to walk in and see everything. Um, so I already said that trains sort of played a role in my life. Did pl trains have a role in your life growing up, or is this a an adult discovery?
No, this was very much a lifelong passion. My grandfather, who was a major influence in my life, loved trains. He would tell me stories about growing up in Washington, D.C. He would go to visit his cousins up in Philadelphia. He would take the Pennsylvania or the Baltimore and Ohio and go up there. And he always was nostalgic for the old steam engines. And of course, he was also a Lionel train collector. So he would have his Lionel train set up in the basement, and the grandkids would come over and run the trains whenever they were there. And then he and I just bonded over our mutual love of trains. So as we grew up, every family vacation, it's kind of funny that you mentioned the dinosaur versus trains. My brother was the dinosaur kid, I was the train kid. And so I remember one week or one year we did a trip out to the West. And we said, great, we're going to go to Yellowstone and we're going to go to Thermopolis and see the old dinosaur dig site up there. but we have to make a stop at both the Golden Spike National Historic Site to see the trains there. And since we're already going to go see Mount Rushmore, hey, there's just a tourist railroad right around the corner. So we will stop there to make sure that both kids, get their fill of what they're wanting to see. But my grandfather and I, as I grew up, we would then travel all over the country riding behind historic railroads and discovered the East Broad Top in 2007 and started to come up here. And even now, after he's passed, I'm still very, very passionate about trains and train travel. Um, and you know, obviously, it's now my life. So I even have a garden railroad in my backyard that I have miniature live steam engines that actually run on coal and butane and water that run around in the backyard. So if I get fed up with my day job at the railroad, I go home to my fake railroad and I run that for a bit. And then I say, oh, I miss my big railroad and go back the next day. So I don't know if that's the definition of insanity or whether it's truly a passion, but it's one of the two.
No, around here we call that passion. We don't call that insanity. So before we got on recording, we talked a little bit about Disney and talking about the garden train. Does that mean you take a little extra time in Germany in Epcot to walk through the train setup?
Yes, I have to spend at least 15 minutes there. And the stuff you see at Epcot is the same type of stuff that's in my backyard. While
Okay,
Epcot is mainly focused on European and German trains specifically, mine is based on American 3-foot railroading, which is what we have here at the East Broad Top. So I
cool.
have a layout based on one of my favorite places I would go with my grandfather, Colorado and New Mexico. So I have a decent sized railroad that goes up hills and has a whole bunch of plants, evergreens, and different things. So, it's my own little taste of Colorado narrow gauge railroading that I've brought east and then have in my backyard. So,
Oh, I love that. So let's talk about East Broad Top specifically. What is the history? Why was it built and and what was it hauling?
yep. So the East Broad Top Railroad and Coal Company was chartered in 1856 to connect several industries together, mainly the coal and the iron industries. Starting the late 1700s in this area, you have Juniata Iron, which was some of the earliest iron furnaces in Pennsylvania, right along the Juniata River. And right here in the modern day town of Orbizonia, you had the Bedford furnace that would allow for the iron industry to really get going here. They had plenty of timber, but once they ran out of the timber, they needed another fuel source. And they discovered on the east side of the Broad Top Mountain a bunch of semi bituminous coal, which is a mixture of hard and soft coal, made it very good for industrial use. But of course, the problem is transportation. The transportation is how do you get the coal to market so that way you can make money off it? How do you get the iron to market? And how do you combine the two things to that way you can grow your iron industry? So the railroad was the solution to that. And they chartered it in 1856, but because of the Civil War and the lack of funds, the railroad wasn't built until 1872. At that point, they decided to make a narrow gauge railroad, which meant that it could better handle the curves and the grades to get up to the coal fields. Finished construction in 1874. And then for the first 30 years or so, the railroad is just hauling coal and iron, basically connecting the coal mines that were also owned by the railroad company to the iron industry in Rock Hill Furnace, and then shipping it north to the town of Mount Union, where it connected with the Pennsylvania Railroad, and then it would be able to go out to market from there. Um, so that was its main livelihood. About 1908 or so, the iron played out, but at that same time, up in Mount Union, you had three different brick plants that were making fire brick that was then being used in the blast furnaces in Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, Baltimore, etc. And they needed two things: coal. Okay, the East Broad Top's already hauling that, and then a white rock called ganister, which is also used in that brick making process. And it just so happens that along Jack's Mountain, which parallels our right of way, there's a whole bunch of that ganister rock, and the EBT is already running right to where their mines and their quarries are. So for the next 50 years or so, the EBT is hauling coal. It's transloading it to the Pennsylvania Railroad, cleaning and sorting it, um, delivering the goods to these brick plants, and then was able to modernize and keep going until the 1950s when the railroad ultimately shut down as a common carrier.
Gotcha. Um, and I'm gonna profess my my lack of knowledge here. Um, I remember when I first saw you guys were narrow gauge. Um, I confused that with N gauge
Mhm.
model trains. So, can you explain what a narrow gauge train is?
So narrow gauge is this idea of building stuff smaller in order to save costs and be able to better navigate the terrain that you're going through. It was originally started with the Brits over in the UK. They started experimenting with anything from 2 foot gauge, 3 foot gauge, 3.5 foot gauge, meter gauge, all sorts of these different things. In the United States, 3 feet between the rails was sort of the common narrow gauge size. What that boiled down to, 36 inches between the rails, it meant that everything was smaller.
Mhm.
And depending on the terrain you're going through, especially for the mountains here in South Central PA, that means that instead of building a tunnel through a big ridge, you can parallel the ridge and have a little bit more um, of a navigable track that can go along the hillside and be able to save costs on building your track edge. It also meant that your equipment that you're buying is three-quarters the size, which means it's three-quarters the cost.
Mhm.
So it's a good kind of intro way to begin building your railroad. And if it's successful enough, great, you can spend the money and upgrade to standard gauge, which is 4 feet 8.5 inches. But it at least gets you going for that point. Some railroads never switched out of 3 foot. We never switched out of 3 foot. Some railroads out in Colorado, Alaska, Oregon never, changed out of 3 foot. They always stayed that way. Um, but to put it in perspective, since we keep talking about Disney, it's the same size train as you would find at the Disney Castle Park. So,
Okay.
when you're walking up to Main Street USA, it's the same right of way width that you'd have if you're taking the Walt Disney World Railroad or the Disneyland Railroad. Our equipment is just much bigger because their stuff is more of the late 1800s, very early 1900s, where ours is more of 1910 onward as far as our equipment is.
Okay. No, that's it. I think that'll give people really good um visual for then how what the size is. Um, am I right in that you guys are EBT is the only surviving N gauge railroad east of the Mississippi?
So we are the last remaining narrow gauge railroad east of the Mississippi, east of the Rockies, really, that's still
Okay.
operating its original location.
Okay.
We are certainly not the only 3 foot on the East Coast. However, we're the last one running where it was originally built to run.
Okay.
There are a couple of other railroads kind of scattered up and down the coast that are recreations of what would have run. An example of that is the Tweetsie Railroad down in North Carolina. The Tweetsie was a narrow gauge that ran across the Tennessee North Carolina border. And the modern day Tweetsie Railroad is a theme park that has a train that happens to run around the park that has original equipment from that railroad, but is not the same operating company. It's not the same trackage. It has some of the same equipment, but it's not the same place. We are still in our same location, pulling trains just as we would have back in 1874, back in 1920, back in 1956, now here in 2026.
Yeah, I mean that's what's so incredible. And I think what's even more incredible is when people hear this this next story. Um, the the scrap dealer story.
Yes. So in late 1955, the railroad was pretty much on its last legs. The equipment was starting to become in disrepair. The coal traffic that had kept the railroad afloat, as well as the Ganister business, had really declined. Two of the three brick plants up in Mount Union either closed, and then one of them switched over to natural gas. So it no longer needed all of the fuel that the railroad was bringing in. So the railroad lost all of its major customers. Between that and losing the mail contract in 1954, the end was coming. They limped it along as long as they could. And then the last train ran April 6th, 1956. They put the train away and they sold it to a scrap dealer. And for all intents and purposes, that should be the end of the EBT story. Where I'm talking to you from now should be a Dollar General parking lot or something very exciting. But a small miracle happened. The EBT was bought along with Associated Coal Company by the Kowalczyk Salvage Company and Nick Kowalczyk. And depending on who you hear the story from, there's two different stories the family tells. The first is that young Nick Kowalczyk always had a soft spot for trains. And when he was growing up, he saved his money to buy himself a model train. And by the time he did, he gave the money to his brother. who then went down to Sears and Roebuck to supposedly buy him a model train, but he gave his brother the money, never got his toy train set. Uh, but either way, he bought this railroad, he bought all the assets. And the second story goes, when he actually stepped on property to see what he bought, he steps inside the roundhouse and hears engine number 12 shaking, quivering in fear. And the other five engines in there are also, afraid. They're scared. And number 12 speaks up and says, "Oh no, this is the junk man. This is the scrapper. He's here to cut us up. And because I'm the oldest and smallest, I'll be the first to go." And they all start crying and, side rods shaking, everything. And Nick says, "Whoa, I am the scrapper. But I promise as long as I live, I will never put a torch to any of you. And I hope to see you all back on the rails shortly." So, for whatever reason, however much truth may be in that story, the scrap dealer doesn't scrap the railroad. It sits for a couple of years. He tears away a couple of the old buildings that were not really salvageable at that point. He tears up one or two branch lines, but the main line itself, all the engines, all the cars are still sitting. In 1960, the twin boroughs of Rock Hill Furnace and Orbazonia approached Mr. Kowalczyk and say, "We're having our bicentennial. We have our annual homecoming celebration that occurs every year in August. We would love for you to drag one of the engines out and put it on display so that we can have it as part of our parade." And Mr. Kowalczyk says, "I'll do you one better. I'm going to fire up two of the engines, get out the old passenger equipment. We'll convert a few of the freight cars into passenger stock. And for your homecoming celebration, we'll run trains." And it was so successful that for the next 51 years, every summer, the Kowalczyks would fire up the old steam engines and run a train over a brief portion of the railroad, about 4.5 miles, that goes from our station here in Rock Hill, Furnace, Normazonia, up to Colgate Grove and back. So for 51 years up until 2011, the railroad is run under Kowalczyk ownership. And then in 2011, the family, who's now on their second generation, says, "We love this place, but we're a scrap company. We're really not the best fit for this railroad." And the railroad shuts down again.
Yeah. And then, so it shut down again in 2011, right? And then,
Yes.
so then it was rescued in 2020.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep. So for those 9 years, the Kowalczyk family is trying to find the right operator for the railroad. A part of it is sold off to another organization, but they never really get off the ground. Meanwhile, everyone is either at the point of, we need to save the EBT because it's so intact. It has all the original equipment, it has all of the original buildings. The right of way is literally just sitting in the trees, being overgrown. Something has to happen with them. While this is going on, a volunteer group called the Friends of the East Broad Top, who had been on property for a decade prior, is trying to keep the buildings afloat. They're working on other projects in the hopes that this railroad will one day come back. And their prayers were answered in 2020. A group of railroaders who have a passion for rescuing old trains, Bennett Levin, Wick Morman, Henry Posner, whose names are attached to organizations like Amtrak, Norfolk Southern, the Railroad Development Corporation, get together with longtime EBT fans and railroad professionals, and they create the East Broad Top Foundation, the EBT Foundation. And it was announced on February 14th, 2020, Valentine's Day, that the EBT was back, that they had bought the railroad from the Kowalczyks and were in the process of restoring the line. And since then, we've been actively restoring the trackage. We've rebuilt the track up to Colgate Grove, which is what most families remember riding from 1960 onwards. We've restored one of the steam locomotives, number 16, which had last operated in 1956.
Wow.
We've bought four brand new passenger cars, which have been in use regularly with our trains. We are now actively restoring our trackage heading south, heading towards the communities of Three Springs and Saltillo, one day heading back up the mountain through our two tunnels to the town of Robertsdale. And we're keeping this thing afloat, making it bigger and better, and trying to make sure that this railroad, we've pulled it out of the grave twice. We're not letting it happen again. And we are, really working to preserve this national treasure.
Yeah, I mean it's such a story and such a history, and I always love when people are so passionate that they won't let it die, like they won't let it go away. Um, and it's such a great illustration of that. Now, The Smithsonian called, and you mentioned this earlier, called it an incomparable national treasure. Was that the train, the facility in whole, or the machine shop?
There was everything in whole.
Okay.
In the late 1980s, William Mithune, who was the transportation curator with the Smithsonian Institution, visited the EBT and afterwards remarked that the East Broad Top was an incomparable national treasure consisting of a site complete with all of the equipment, rolling stock, buildings, etc. Altogether is the most complete example of a late 19th century, early 20th century industrial heritage site anywhere in North America, which is something that we've double checked with the Smithsonian to make sure that's an accurate quote. And it sure is. And it's something that we try to uphold to the highest possible standard. The beauty of this place is it's all original. You can ride a tourist railroad, a heritage railroad in hundreds of other places in the US. You can go there, and for the most part, the equipment you're going to be riding on is a conglomeration of other railroads' cars.
Okay.
I'll give another railroad an example. The Strasburg Railroad. It's about two
Hmm.
hours east of us. They're a fantastic organization. They've been around for decades, and they've haul hundreds of thousands of people annually. But their engines are all from other railroads. They're not
Yeah.
original to the Strasburg Railroad. They have one that came from Colorado, one from, or multiples, I guess, from Canada, one from Virginia. Their railroad cars that you ride in are from many different railroads, the Maryland, Pennsylvania, Boston and Maine, Western Maryland, which is fantastic that they've all been saved, but none of it's original to the railroad. When you come here, all of the buildings are still here that have been here since the late 1800s. The equipment that's pulling your train is the same equipment that would have been pulling your train if you had been here 100 years ago. The right of way is the exact same. You're not riding on something that was, tore out, turned into a trail, and then put back in as a railroad. The tracks have always been here. When you step inside the buildings, literally when the guys were working inside the machine shop, they put their tools down and left. It looks exactly the same that it did back in the late 1950s when it shut down. Stepping in here is a time capsule.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it. It literally is if you're a time traveler and you've stepped through a portal and suddenly you're transported back to the 1940s or 1950s. This railroad, it looks exactly the same as it did back then. Um, and we try to make sure that the experience that we offer to guests today is that experience. You're going to come in. Yes, we'll have modern facilities like, nice clean restrooms, and we'll make sure that, there's not dirt and grime on the passenger cars when you come in. But we try to preserve that grit and grime of a coal railroad that you can't really replicate.
Right.
It's not something that's behind museum glass. This is a railroad. You're going to have soot and cinders from the steam engine. You're going to hear the whistle blow. You're going to have the smoke and steam billowing above your head. The buildings are going to have that patina that you can't recreate. Otherwise, it's something that really needs to be experienced to be believed. But because the Smithsonian has put such accreditation behind us, we try every day to make sure that we're living up to that standard.
Yeah. And I mean that's quite an endorsement. So we love we love to see it. Um mentioned the machine shop. That's gone through a lot of restoration as well. And it's a belt-driven machine shop, right? What
Yes.
describe what that is as well.
So think about a company today that might be making a part. They're going to have modern CNC machines that are going to have driven by a motor to be able to craft a part. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, you didn't have Amazon if you were trying to order a part for a steam locomotive. Every machine was unique to itself. And each, steam engine, even though it might have the same, okay, I need these bolts with this threading and I need, this rivet or that, all of them are going to be slightly custom, which means you have to make your own parts. So all in all, that means that if you have to fix your engine or you have to make something, you have to make it yourself.
Right.
So you had to have a machine shop complex that could then support those activities. And our complex is the last remaining of its kind anywhere in North America that still has the original belt-driven equipment. Everything is run off of an overhead belt system that's actually powered by a steam engine, not one that rolls down the track, but one that's a stationary engine that dates back to at least 1863.
Wow.
When the Interstate Commerce Commission came through in 1917, they did an inventory during the war, of everything that was at every railroad. And when they came here, excuse me, even they didn't know how old this thing was.
Wow.
So they guesstimated it was 1863. It is of that vintage, but that is powered by stationary boilers that use steam power, just like the ones that roll down our track. And then that powers a overhead belt that then connects to other line shafts, counter shafts, pulleys, wheels, etc. And then every machine in there is run off of that overhead belt. You literally have to drag the belt over onto a wheel that then engages the machine to then do whatever process you're trying to do. So, hey, you need to press the wheel off the axle in order to replace them. Okay, that's done by a belt driven machine. You need to drill a hole in a piece of sheet metal. That's done with a machine that's powered by an overhead belt. You're not plugging into an electrical box. This is done by mechanical power that's all connected, being driven by this overhead system. And many machine shops today will still have equipment that dates back to the 1900s, 1920s era, but they've all been upgraded with electric motors to run their belts as opposed to a steam driven system. Or they've completely taken the motor out of the equation and they just use electricity with something to do it. Ours is the exact same that it was back in 1920, and the belt still turn.
Wow.
Again, we have a fantastic group of volunteers called the Friends of the East Broad Top. The Friends were founded in 1983 to primarily model the EBT and be able to showcase, hey, this is what the EBT looked like, X many years ago. But as time went on, they realized that if they didn't actually step in to help the railroad and to preserve some of those buildings, there would be no EBT to model.
Wow.
So starting in about 2001, they were put on site to start doing very limited work on a building that was kind of out of the way. The management at the time didn't quite know whether to trust them or not. So they put them at the far end of the rail yard. Oh, if you mess this up, at least it's somewhere that the public's not going to see.
Right.
But they did such a great job that over time, more and more restoration activities were given over to them. And a large reason why the machine shop complex is still standing today is because of their work. They've replaced roofs. They've made buildings level again. In the case of the machine shop, they actually had to raise one of the walls about 9 or 10 inches because the
Wow.
building had settled over time.
Yeah.
When they built these things back in the late 1800s, they didn't think they'd be here 140, 150 years later. They said, well, we'll build it now. If it falls down, we'll rebuild it. Or maybe we
Right.
won't need that building, later on. And so, thanks to the Friends, they've restored a lot of that. And then many different people have come in to document them, including one who wrote a book called The Shops of These Brought Up that documents all the machines. But again, it's a time capsule. You step in there, everything is exactly as it was. And the beauty of the restoration work that the Friends do is they come in, they'll rebuild something, and they'll make it look like nothing happened at all.
Wow.
So even though we know that they raised the building 10 inches on one wall, you're not going to see wood. You're going to see wood that is painted over to look like it's been there for 80, 90 years. I think the local Ace Hardware store even has a blend of paint that is called EBT Schmutz. That is the right blend of like black plus red paint plus
Wow.
whatever to look like that paint's been patinaed for God knows how many decades in order to properly put those boards back in and make it look like they didn't do anything.
Wow. That is total artistry. I love that. Um, so we've talked a lot about the history and stuff. Like, let's talk about it when someone comes to visit, because everyone who's going by or near needs to visit. Um, like what can you expect in a typical visit? Like, what should people be getting tickets for or experiencing?
So we have two primary experiences when people come to visit us: the train ride and the guided tours through the Roundhouse Machine Shop.
Hmm.
Your train ride features multiple different destinations. You can either head north on a 1 hour round trip up to Colgate Grove and return. Colgate Grove is a picnic area that is only accessible by rail.
Oh,
There's multiple
cool.
picnic shelters up there. We do a lot of special events throughout the year up there. Dinner trains, my personal favorite, the Broad Top Brew Train. So
Mm.
you take the train as your vehicle to get to the destination. Once you stop off the train, there's a catered meal, live band, fire pits, cash beer van. it's a really great way to kind of just decompress in nature, all in a setting where you have, a steam locomotive and train behind
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
You can head south over our recently reopened trackage. We're actively restoring our track, heading down to the communities of Three Springs and Saltillo. We're currently at the town of Pogue, which is about 2.5 miles south of us. And we're currently working to expand the track even further. So hopefully in the next few years, you'll have the 1 hour trip heading north and about a 3 hour trip heading south. That'll include lunch layover in Saltillo. But for now, you can come and take a shorter version of that ride because it's a preview of things to come.
Cool.
And then, of course, the guided tours itself, you take an hour walking tour with a guide that'll then take you through the history of the railroad, take you inside the belt driven machine shop complex, take you inside the roundhouse to show you where we service the locomotives daily still, and get an appreciation for what this place truly is. Um, and again, depending on the time of year, we have different things coming along. We always do some sort of Valentine's Day event in February. Our season opens up with the steam locomotive, usually around the 1st of May. And then, during the year, we have different events like EBT Goes to War. This year
Hmm.
we had a Lady Lois, which was an M2 light tank, a Stuart light tank that came down from the Tank Museum up in Berwick, PA. So people could take rides on a World War II tank that actually saw service over there,
Wow.
which was really fun that you could only access by train. We do, of course, during the fall, our Pumpkin Patch Express, where the families can come out, take a train ride, go to the pumpkin patch, experience games and activities up at Colgate Grove. And then during the holiday season, Christmas in the Coal Country, which is PA's homegrown holiday tradition. I like to call it Polar Express Light because you won't have all the pomp and circumstance of what you would experience in the Polar Express movie, but you get a very homegrown, very retro Christmas experience that is going to be feel very cozy, very honoring our heritage, and it's something that families come out for year after year to experience. So no matter whether you're a kid or a kid at heart, there's always something here for people to do and for people to see.
And you guys are located off, is it what major highway are you guys located sort
So
of
we
off?
are 20 minutes north of the PA Turnpike. We're
Okay,
off of
right.
exit 180, which is the Fort Littleton exit
Okay.
off of US 522. We're also just off of 22, which is an east-west highway that goes through Altoona, Johnstown, uh, Harrisburg, that sort of thing. So people have this misconception that we're in the middle of nowhere because we're in a rural area in Huntington County, which is, an hour south of State College, an hour east of
Yeah.
Altoona, PA. But we're within 3 hours of a quarter of the US population. So it makes a very easy day trip, whether you're down in Baltimore or DC, over in Harrisburg, whether you're over in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, New York City. We're a very easy drive to get to from there. And people love coming to us because we offer, that kind of rural train ride experience that you're not going to find anywhere else. We have people that come back year over year, and they'll sometimes, in other cases, drive past other railroads to come see us, which we're very honored and happy to have.
And and I think that's I know when we met at the expo and you said something that I really like is sort of one of my travel philosophies is that like you can spend a day there or you can be driving through on the turnpike and take that little side quest and spend an hour and a half there instead of somewhere else. Um and I think that's what it doesn't like right it doesn't have to be a full day event. It can be a like stop in, ride a train, get back in your car.
Exactly. We're easy to get to off the turnpike and other highways, but we realize that depending on who you are and what your background is, some people may not want to spend a whole day at a railroad site. You might be off to visit grandma and grandpa on the other end of the state. You might be going to a family reunion or a wedding. We have tons of people that will look up things to do in the area, and we're one of the few things that is out there. And okay, cool, we'll stop off to a train ride. And then they say, oh, wow, I'd love to do this with my friends later on. We'll come back up for a dinner train or we'll come back up for an ice cream train or something like that. Our audience, we try to cater to everyone. While rail fans, of course, are the train nuts who, know everything about the railroad and want to make sure that they get the full package when they come up here. 90% of our ridership is families. It's
Hmm.
grandparents with grandkids. It's parents with kids. It's young adults who are looking for a unique way to spend an afternoon or a morning. And so we try to have everything that no matter what your interest level is in trains, if you're a train nut, you can absolutely spend a full day with us. If you're passing through the area, it can be a side trip as part of a larger day. When bus groups come up to see us, they usually would do what we call a sails and rails package. Racetown Lake, which gets visited by over 2 million people every year, is just 40 minutes west of
Oh,
us.
okay.
So you can take a cruise out on Racetown Lake, boat ride, and then come down to us in the afternoon. So you get, two different modes of transportation history that is very close to each other. So you can, again, make an afternoon of it, full day, half day, 1 hour side quest, you know, and then hopefully we hook you enough that you come back to see what else we have. And the beauty of this railroad is there's so much going on restoration wise with the equipment, the buildings, the trackage that when you come back the next time, there is visible evidence of something has changed. And even the people who we see almost once a month up here always say, "Oh my gosh, when did you paint that building?" "Oh yeah, that was on Tuesday." "Today's Thursday." "Yeah, we painted it 2 days ago." There's active stuff that they come back to see, and it's almost like they want to see the process of restoring it firsthand, and they get those glimpses.
Yeah. And you know, so we sort of know how much time to plan for. I'm gonna say spend your day there. But like you mentioned like the soot and stuff, like what should people be aware of? Like what should we be wearing? Are you guys a little higher in the mountains that we need to pack layers? Sort of what
So with us, we always say dress for the weather. Bring a jacket with you just in case. Usually, you can tell pretty well if there's going to be a rainstorm coming through. With us, we offer four different classes of service on the train, and we'll be soon adding another one. Enclosed coaches is our standard class. That's going to be plush seating with large windows that partially open and close. So if you're looking for something that's going to be more of a comfortable ride with a nice window, that especially if it's a little cooler, those cars are going to be heated during the winter and they'll have the windows open during the summer to get a nice breeze. That's your standard class. We have open air cars with a roof that we put in two different ends of the train. That way you can at least see the engine work a little bit more, hear it a little bit more without the window in your way, but it does have a roof in case of inclement weather or, of course, soot. If you want the true railroader experience, you're going to want to ride in the cinder car. That
nice.
is a flat car without a roof right behind the steam engine, and the name is exactly what it means. If you want to get covered in a little bit of soot, maybe a little bit of water, oil, the grease, kind of get that full railroader experience. We have a lot of people that come out that say that's what they want, and I say more power to you. But they come out and they love riding behind the engine because you're right there. You get to hear, see, and feel everything happening with the locomotive. And if you want something that is a little bit more nostalgic, at the very end of our train is a caboose, and we actually just this week debuted our red, white, and blue scheme on our caboose that just got restored, caboose number 27. It dates from 1920, home built in the shops. It has the cupola up top, so you and three of your friends can be up there with a bird's eye view above the train. You can still stick your head out
Cool.
the window to see everything from a different vantage point. And usually, if the conductor is in a good mood, which is 99.9% of the time, they'll open the back door so you can actually see the tracks going away from you behind you.
Wow.
So it's a really, really fun experience to be back there. So, if you don't like soot, we got you covered. If you love soot, boy, do we have something for
W-
you.
We can cover
Um,
you with it.
Oh, we will not necessarily cover you, but we'll give you a nice patina, we'll call it, if you want that. But of course, we always recommend wearing closed-toed shoes. Bring a bottle of water with you. We have an on-site gift shop that has our tchotchkes and merchandise for people who want to take home a souvenir. All of our facilities are ADA accessible. We have a
Okay.
lift on our train that can accommodate up to 600 pounds. So no
Nice.
matter whether you're in a mobility device or you just don't like stairs, we have something that'll get you on and off the trains without an issue. All of our buildings have ramps to get into them. So that way, again, it's not going to be an accessibility issue. And even on the guided tour, we invested in an ADA accessible golf cart that can haul people in wheelchairs around.
Nice.
So again, if your family says, "Hey, I want to bring my grandfather, he's a big train fan, but he doesn't really like walking too far," we can still get him inside the roundhouse. We'll still get him inside the machine shop and get you, to and from places on property. We tried very hard to make ourselves accessible to anybody, no matter of what their mobility is, no matter what their age is, whatever their, experience that they want to have is. So we're one of the very few railroads in the country that offers that.
And I wanted to finish up with one question. Like, what, where do you hope EBT is in like 10 years?
As I said, the railroad is in a constant state of growth right now. We own 27 and a half miles of the original 33, which means that we're always looking to expand our trackage. Tomorrow, they're literally going to be down in Saltillo rebuilding track heading north. So in 2 or 3 years, we hope to have um, a train ride that goes 18 miles round trip heading south out of Rock Hill Furnace. The first time you'll be able to do that since 1956.
Wow.
Past that, we're already looking at opportunities to expand heading further south into the rugged mountains of southern Huntingdon County. We've got 2 tunnels on our way, a high bridge, and a few other things, but we'll be able to offer different length trips again, whether you want an hour trip, a 3 hour trip, hopefully a 5 hour or 6 hour round trip eventually to get the full experience. We'll still offer our guided tours. Coming up soon will be our rail bike experience as well. So you can actually take a pedal car with an e-assist motor on them down a portion of our old right of way. So again, if you're looking for more of an outdoorsy active thing to do, we'll have that going. And of course, we'll still have a whole bunch of different events. So again, whether you're a history lover, a music lover who wants to come see a concert and ride a train, something that's for the kids, something for the adults, we're going to have a lot of different stuff. The future is very, very bright here at the East Broad Top, and there's going to be a lot happening with that. So I encourage people who are trying to think ahead to visit our website, eastbroadtop.com. Give us a call, 814-447-3285. Look us up. We're one of many attractions in PA that's railroad themed. So
Hmm.
you can easily make a railroad week or a weekend out of coming across our state and seeing different places. But I guarantee you haven't seen anything like these Broad Top before. And there's a lot of cool stuff happening. So I can't wait to see where we are in 10 years when we're doing even more stuff.
Yeah, it's you guys have nothing but up to go, and I love that for you. But thank you so much for your time, Andrew. This has been great, and I hope people who are traveling through or nearby or make a weekend of it and come visit you guys real soon.
Absolutely. We hope to see y'all there.
Great. Thank you. A big thank you again to Andrew for sharing his time, information, and passion. The East Broad Top Railroad is exactly the kind of place I love to talk about. A story so extraordinary, you almost can't believe it's real, but it's hiding in plain sight in the mountains of Pennsylvania. So if you're anywhere near there or going down the Pennsylvania Turnpike, it's just 20 minutes north of exit 180. And like we said, it can be a side quest and you stop on your way going somewhere or make it a full day. You can ride in a plush coach or get covered in a little bit of cinders behind that steam engine if you want. But there's just such an amazing story to be told when you visit there. I will leave the information for the website and the phone number again in the show notes. But if you go, tell them that you heard it on Pop Culture Passport or that Roman Yeti sent them. And with that, we add another stamp to our pop culture passport. I hope this episode inspires you to get out and explore all that is quirky and cool, even in your own backyard. Follow, download, and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Tell a friend and leave a review if you like what we're doing. It really does help the show to grow. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook. Just search for the Roman Yeti. Keep roaming and finding your fun.